Hi there, welcome back to Save with Crypto. My name is Save with Crypto, and I just want to talk about this Strait of Hormuz, which is in the Persian Gulf, that Iran are threatening to close. Now, this is obviously massively important because you've got here, they've got the United Arab Emirates, you've got Qatar, you've got Bahrain there, you've got Kuwait there, and you've got Iran up here. All these places produce oil, and 20% of the oil in the world passes through this strait. So obviously closing that strait there would have worldwide consequences. I asked Grok about this. Can you explain why Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz would be devastating for world markets?
If Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, it'd choke off a critical global oil supply route. About 20% of the world's oil, around 20 million barrels a day, flows through this narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to global markets. A closure would spike oil prices, disrupt supply chains, and hit industries like shipping, manufacturing, and aviation hard, especially in energy-dependent economies. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE rely on the strait for exports, and Asia, particularly China and India, depends on it for imports. Even a partial blockade could cause panic in markets, drive up inflation, and trigger economic instability. Plus, military tensions could escalate, adding more uncertainty. It's a choke point with massive ripple effects.
How likely is it that they would actually close it?
The likelihood of Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz in 2025 is tough to pin down, but recent chatter suggests it's a mixed bag. Iran's parliament reportedly approved the idea of closing the strait as a response to U.S. airstrikes on its nuclear sites, with some Iranian officials, like a representative of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, pushing for retaliation against American and Western ships. Posts on X from mid-June also show Iranian officials, like Brigadier General Ismail Qathari, saying they're seriously considering it. This rhetoric has driven up market fears, with polymarket odds briefly spiking to a 52% chance of closure by year-end, though they've since dropped to 29%, suggesting cooler heads might be prevailing. On the flip side, analysts argue it's a risky move for Iran. Shutting the strait would hurt their own oil exports to China, slashing their revenue, and could provoke a stronger U.S. military response. Geography and the U.S. naval presence make a full closure tricky too. It's not like flipping a switch. So, while the threat's real and tensions are high, a complete shutdown feels less likely than posturing to rattle markets. Let me check for any fresh updates on the Strait of Hormuz situation. Iran's parliament has indeed pushed for closing the strait, as reported by sources like Press TV, following U.S. strikes on their nuclear facilities, but the final call rests with Iran's Supreme National Security Council. No new developments in the last few hours indicate an imminent closure, though. The U.S., through figures like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has urged China to lean on Iran to keep the strait open, given China's heavy reliance on its oil flow. Market sentiment is still jittery. Oil prices are volatile, but the consensus among analysts, like those cited in outlets such as the Washington Post, is that a full closure remains unlikely due to Iran's own economic dependence on the strait and the risk of escalating conflict with global powers. Polymarket odds have also dipped further to around 25% for a closure by the end of 2025, reflecting some easing of immediate fears. Still, the situation's tense, and Iran's using the threat to flex its muscle.
I've heard that Iran may be selling oil illegally to the Chinese. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Iran selling oil to China despite Western sanctions. Iran's been using what's called a dark fleet of tankers, ships that turn off their transponders to avoid detection, to move oil to China, which buys about 90% of Iran's oil exports. These shipments are often rebranded as coming from places like Malaysia or other Middle Eastern countries to dodge scrutiny. Small Chinese refineries, known as teapots, in places like Shandong, handle most of this oil, buying it at steep discounts. There's also chatter about blacklisted Hong Kong firms, false invoicing, and crypto laundering to facilitate these deals. China's customs data underreports these imports, listing only a fraction of the actual crude oil volume. Some say up to $8.5 billion worth in early 2024 alone. The catch is, U.S. sanctions aim to curb this, but enforcement's been spotty, and China's not keen on playing ball with unilateral sanctions.
So if the Strait of Hormuz was closed, that would also affect the illegal oil sales to China, yeah?
Yep, exactly. If the Strait of Hormuz got closed, it'd mess up Iran's oil sales to China, legal or illegal. The strait's the main route for Iran's oil tankers, including that dark fleet sneaking oil to China's refineries. A closure would strand those shipments, cutting off Iran's biggest buyer and tanking their oil revenue. China would also feel the pinch, facing higher prices and supply shortages, since they rely on Iran for about 10% of their crude. It's a lose-lose for both, which is why some argue Iran's threats to close the strait are more bark than bite.
Yeah, how would it affect the price of Bitcoin?
If Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, Bitcoin's price would likely take a hit in the short term. The strait's closure could spike oil prices, potentially to $120 to $150 per barrel, causing global inflation fears and a sell-off in risk assets, including crypto. Bitcoin recently dropped below $100,000 amid these tensions, with nearly $950 million in crypto liquidations, reflecting jittery markets. Analysts, like those at Cointelegraph, suggest a closure could push Bitcoin toward $90,000 or lower, as investors flee to safe haven assets like the US dollar. However, Bitcoin's long-term outlook might stay resilient, tied more to dollar weakness than geopolitics, as some argue it could benefit from inflation over time.
But this gives opportunities, and what better time to have a competition? We've done a couple of these before. This one's on Blofin. It's normally really good because the people who sort of like normally just lurk in the background, all of a sudden we see them sort of flourish and do really well, and then we can discuss it in the Telegram group, and it's all really good fun. The prizes are phenomenal. I'm not sure how much use a Cybertruck would be in the UK. In fact, I think zero use, unfortunately, because they're illegal on our roads. But there are lots of good prizes, and you get prizes just for, participating. So it's just worth being in there. If you've signed up for Blofin using my link, you will automatically be in the team. If you haven't done that, go to savewith.crypto.org/Blofin, and then you can enter the competition. So it's all pretty cool, really. So I think we can have a lot of fun there. The competition starts in 3 days' time, and you can register right now. So go over there and do that. If you like the sound of that, please do give the video a big fat like. Make sure you are subscribed. Any questions, just ask in the comments down below. Make sure you got the notifications set on all so you get notified of my timely videos. And above all, tell your friends and join the competition. All right, see ya. Bye.